The massive crystal dome stretched high above the gathered representatives, its surface reflecting the worried faces of beings from across the galaxy. Ambassador Ginho Park adjusted his dark blue uniform and looked around the vast chamber. Creatures of every shape and size filled the seats, some floating, some crawling, others standing on legs he could not count. The air hummed with nervous energy. Translators buzzed and clicked as hundreds of different languages mixed together into one anxious sound. Jinho had been to many of these meetings before, but today felt different. Today everyone was afraid. At the center of the chamber, a holographic image flickered to life. It showed a massive black ship, larger than most moons. Weapons covered, its surface like deadly spikes. This was just one ship from the hegemony fleet, and they had thousands more. Citizens of the Confederation, the Secretary General's voice boomed through hidden speakers. The tall, blue-skinned alien raised all 4 of his arms for silence. We face our darkest hour. The hegemony has given us one solar cycle to decide. Surrender completely, or they will destroy every world in our alliance. Ginho felt his stomach tighten. It read the reports. When the hegemony conquered a world, they left nothing alive. Not the forests, not the oceans, not even the smallest insect. They turned entire planets into balls of melted glass and ash. The Vorthok representative stood first. Its body looked like a walking diamond, beautiful but cold. Light pulsed through its crystal form as it spoke. The hegemony's message is clear. We have all seen what happens to those who resist. The planet Zarian fought them for 3 years. Now Zarian is a dead rock floating in space. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Jinho watched as ancient civilizations, species that had existed for millions of years, nodded their heads in fear. Next came the ethereal delegate. Its body was made of colorful gas that shifted and swirled as it moved. When it spoke, its voice came through a mechanical translator that made it sound hollow and distant. My people have lived for 10 million years. We have survived ice ages, solar storms, and cosmic disasters. But we cannot survive the hegemony. No one can. Surrender is our only choice. One by one, representatives stood to cast their votes. The Mollusk Collective, with their shell-covered bodies, voted to surrender. The machine minds, whose robot forms gleamed under the chamber lights, calculated the odds and chose submission. The plant kingdoms, their leafy ambassadors swaying, gently whispered their agreement to give up. Each vote appeared on the massive holographic display floating above them. The numbers climbed steadily. Surrender 247. Surrender 568. Surrender 799. Ginho watched the count with growing sadness. These were civilizations that had built wonders beyond human imagination. The Vorthok had created cities from pure crystal that sang in the wind. The Ethereals had mastered the art of living in the vacuum of space itself. The machine minds had built computers larger than star systems, and now they were all ready to become slaves. Finally, Secretary General's gaze fell on Jinho. The human delegation was small, just 5 people representing all of Earth. They looked tiny in this vast chamber filled with beings of incredible power and age. The vote comes to Earth, the Secretary General announced. How does humanity choose? Jinho stood slowly. He could feel thousands of alien eyes watching him. Some looked curious, others pitying. They all expected the same answer they had heard from everyone else. The Republic of Earth, Ginho said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics, votes no. We will not surrender. Ow! The silence that followed was so complete that Ginho could hear his own heartbeat. Then the whispers began. Shocked gasps echoed from every corner of the chamber. Some representatives turned to stare at the human delegation as if they were looking at creatures from a nightmare. The synthesis representative, a being that was half machine, half something else entirely, spoke first. Its voice was cold and mechanical, like a computer calculating mathematical problems. You condemn your species to extinction, human. Do you not understand what the hegemony does to those who resist? Jinho straightened his shoulders. Around him, his small team of fellow humans stood a little taller. We condemn ourselves to freedom, he replied. There's a difference. More shocked whispers filled the air. The final vote tally appeared on the display for all to see. 999 votes for surrender. One against. The Secretary General looked down at Jin-Ho with something that might have been respect. Or maybe pity. By majority vote, the Galactic Confederation formally surrenders to the hegemony. Earth, having dissented from this decision, is hereby expelled from the Confederation and must face the consequences of its choice alone. Jin-Ho gathered his papers while his team collected their belongings. As they walked toward the chambers, massive doors, he could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Every step echoed in the silence. At the threshold, Jin-Ho turned back one last time. Hundreds of alien faces looked back at him, some ashamed, others afraid, a few almost hopeful. When your children ask why you chose chains over courage, Jin-Ho said, his voice carrying across the vast space, remember this moment. Remember that one species chose to stand. The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder, sealing Earth's fate and leaving the galaxy to face its own choices. The countdown clock on the wall showed exactly 180 days, 14 hours, and 23 minutes. Dr. Mi-Young Kim wiped sweat from her forehead and stared at the mess of wires and crystals spread across her laboratory table.
Ow.
Deep underground beneath the streets of Seoul, her team worked without sleep, trying to turn alien science into human weapons. Hand me the quantum stabilizer, she called out to her assistant. The young man passed her a device that looked like a metal cube covered in blinking lights. Mi-Young carefully connected it to a piece of Vorthok crystal technology that sparkled like a diamond but felt warm to the touch. The crystal had come from the Confederation databases, one of the few gifts humanity received before being kicked out of the Galactic Alliance. Most species guarded their technology secrets carefully, but the databases contained enough information to give humanity a fighting chance. Maybe sparks flew from the connection point. And Taijan Lee, her chief engineer, shook his head sadly. Still using too much power, he said. This prototype would drain our entire power grid in 10 minutes. Mi-Young refused to give up. She had been working on this project for 3 months straight, sleeping only when her body forced her to rest.
Ow.
The device was supposed to create an energy shield around Earth's defense stations. But so far it only created expensive fireworks. The hegemony thinks we are stupid, she muttered, adjusting the crystal alignment. They think we cannot understand their technology. Maybe that will be their mistake. Far above her, in the cold darkness of space, General Hyan Woo-choi floated weightless inside a space station hidden behind Jupiter's largest moon. Through the observation window, he could see the massive planet's red storm spinning endlessly, but his attention was focused on the holographic display showing Earth's solar system. Tiny dots of light marked humanity's defensive positions. They looked pathetic compared to what was coming. Intelligence reports said the hegemony fleet contained over 1,000 ships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. Earth's entire space navy consisted of maybe 50 vessels, and most of those were converted cargo ships with weapons bolted onto their sides. "Sir," called Lieutenant Sora Jung from her control station. "Message from Titan Base." "Put it through," Hyan-Woo replied. A crackling voice came through the speakers. "General, this is Commander Park at Titan Station. All weapons platforms are online. Mass drivers are charged and ready. We've finished deploying nuclear mines along approach vectors 7 through 12, just like you ordered." Han-Woo nodded with satisfaction. The mines were an old human idea, hide explosive devices where the enemy would not expect them. The hegemony probably had sensors that could detect most weapons, but they might not notice mines disguised as floating space rocks. "What about the factories on Mars?" he asked. "Production is ahead of schedule, sir. The automated systems are building missile platforms 24 hours a day. Should have another 100 ready before the deadline." The deadline. Everyone called it that now, as if the hegemony arrival was just another business meeting. Han-Woo. Suppose it helped people stay calm. Panic would not help anyone survive what was coming. Down on Earth's surface? In what used to be a car factory in Detroit, Dong Hyan Nam supervised the strangest assembly line in human history. Where workers once built vehicles for families, now they constructed weapons designed to kill aliens. The factory floor buzzed with activity. Teenage students sat at workbenches, carefully soldering circuit boards that would guide missiles to their targets. Their steady hands and sharp eyes made them perfect for the delicate work. At another station, elderly men and women who had lived through previous wars shared their knowledge with younger volunteers. A crew member called out Mrs. Chen, a grandmother who had survived the chaos of decades past. In urban warfare, every building is a fortress. Every window is a shooting position. The enemy will expect us to fight like soldiers, but we will fight like angry citizens protecting our homes. Dong Haeon watched the scene with mixed emotions. These people should be enjoying peaceful lives. The students should be studying for exams. The elderly should be playing with grandchildren. Instead, they were preparing for the most terrible war in human history, but they did not complain. When the government asked for volunteers, millions of people stepped forward. Factory workers became weapons makers. Teachers became tactical instructors. Doctors prepared for casualties they hoped would never come. A communication device on Dong Haeon's belt buzzed softly. He pressed the button and heard a familiar voice. It was Mi Young, calling from her underground laboratory. Dong Haeon, I have good news, she said, sounding excited for the first time in months. I think we solved the power problem. The new shields might actually work. That is wonderful news, Dong Haeon replied. How many can you build? There was a pause. Maybe 10. 20 if we are very lucky. 10 shields to protect an entire planet. Dong Haeon sighed but tried to sound encouraging. Every little bit helps. Keep working. Later that evening, in a secret facility monitoring alien communications, a translator named Dr. Park read through intercepted hegemony messages. Most were routine military reports, but one caught his attention. Command, this is Scout Fleet 7. The message read, we continue monitoring the human homeworld. Preparations are ... unusual. They appear to be converting their entire civilization for war production. Why do they continue to resist? Do they not understand the futility of their position? The response came from the Hegemony High Command. Continue observations. The humans will surrender when they see our full fleet. No species has ever chosen extinction over submission. Dr. Park smiled as he filed the report. The aliens still did not understand humans at all. That ignorance might be humanity's greatest weapon. Outside his window, the sun was setting over Seoul. In 179 days, the hegemony would arrive. Earth would be ready. The space around Earth's solar system rippled like water as massive ships appeared from nowhere. One moment there was empty blackness dotted with distant stars. The next moment, 1,000 alien vessels filled the void, their dark metal hulls blocking out the light from nearby suns. Each ship was enormous. The smallest ones were bigger than Earth's largest cities. The biggest ones looked like floating mountains covered in weapons. Overlord Krex stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled with satisfaction. His 4 arms crossed over his armored chest as he gazed through the massive window at the small blue planet in the distance. Such a tiny world, he said to his officers. It is hard to believe these humans think they can fight us. Krex had conquered hundreds of planets in his long career. He had seen species that could breathe fire, others that could control gravity with their minds, and some that were made of pure energy. All of them had surrendered when they saw his fleet. The smart ones gave up immediately. The stubborn ones fought for a few days before accepting defeat, but never, in 300 years of conquest, had any species chosen to fight alone. Open communication with the human planet, Krex ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing a human male. In a dark blue uniform, behind him hung colorful flags that represented all the different nations on Earth. The human looked directly at Krex without showing fear, which was unusual. Most species trembled when they first saw a hegemony overlord. Humans of Earth, Krex began spreading his forearms wide in what he thought was a generous gesture. I am Overlord Krex of the hegemony. Your galactic friends have wisely chosen to surrender to us. You alone continue to resist. I am offering you one last chance to give up and save your species from complete destruction. The human on the screen straightened his back and looked straight into the camera. His voice was calm and steady. "Overlord Krex, I am Jinho Park, and I speak for all humans everywhere. We have thought about your offer very carefully, and our answer is simple." Jinho paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch between the two ships. "Come and take it." The screen went black. Krex stared at the empty display for several seconds. In all his years of conquest, no one had ever spoken to him like that. Usually, when he offered surrender terms, species begged for mercy or tried to negotiate better conditions. No one simply told him to come and fight, sir. His tactical officer, a tall alien with 6 eyes and blue skin. "What are your orders?" Krex turned away from the screen, his expression hardening. "Begin the attack. Show these humans what happens when they refuse the hegemony's mercy." The first wave of hegemony fighters launched from their carriers like angry wasps from a disturbed nest. Hundreds of sleek attack ships streaked toward Earth's orbital defenses, expecting to find a few old satellites and maybe some primitive missiles. Instead, they flew directly into the most carefully planned trap in human history. What looked like ordinary space debris suddenly came alive. Chunks of metal that had been floating motionless for months revealed themselves as hidden weapons platforms. They opened fire with lasers and particle beams, catching the hegemony fighters completely by surprise. At the same time, objects that appeared to be simple asteroids exploded in brilliant chains of nuclear fire. The mines had been disguised so perfectly that the alien sensors never detected them. Hegemony ships flew directly into the blasts. Their shields overwhelmed by the unexpected assault, Commander Sung Minnow sat in the cockpit of his small fighter, watching the battle unfold around him. His ship was tiny compared to the alien vessels. It could probably fit inside one of their cargo bays. But it was fast and agile, darting between the massive enemy ships like a mosquito avoiding a giant's hand. "All pilots, this is Commander O." He broadcast to his squadron. "Remember what we trained for? We do not need to destroy their entire fleet. We just need to make them hurt." His fighter swooped down toward a hegemony cruiser, its weapons targeting the alien ship's sensor arrays. Small explosions bloomed along the cruiser's hull as O's missiles found their marks. The massive ship was not destroyed, but now it was partially blind. Behind the front lines, Lieutenant Yoonji Bae worked at her computer console inside Earth's orbital command center. Her fingers flew across holographic keyboards as she launched cyber attacks against the hegemony fleet. The aliens had made their ship's computer systems too connected, too integrated. What they thought was an advantage became a weakness when Yoonji found ways to turn their own technology against them. "Got one," she called out excitedly as a hegemony destroyer suddenly began firing at its own escort ships. The alien crew would figure out the computer problem eventually, but for now, confusion reigned in their ranks. The battle raged for 6 hours. Human ships darted in and out of the alien formations, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Nuclear mines continued exploding throughout the hegemony fleet, and cyber attacks created chaos in their command systems. When the first massive alien, Dreadnought, began falling toward Earth's atmosphere, trailing fire and debris like a dying comet, every human in the solar system cheered. The ship crashed into the Pacific Ocean, sending waves as tall as mountains racing toward distant shores. On his flagship, Overlord Krex watched the tactical display with growing amazement. Red dots marked damaged or destroyed hegemony vessels. There were dozens of them. In 3 centuries of conquest, his fleets had never taken casualties in an opening battle. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "we have lost 37 ships and suffered damage to over 200 more. The humans are using tactics we have never encountered." Krex studied the display, his 4 hands clenched into fists. These primitive humans had just accomplished something that advanced civilizations with millions of years of experience had never managed. They had made the hegemony bleed. The sky above Busan burned with the trails of falling alien ships. Staff Sergeant Geneseo Park crouched behind the rubble of what used to be a shopping mall and watched the enemy dropships land in the city center. Each ship was as big as a building, and when their doors opened, creatures stepped out that looked like nightmares made real. The hegemony soldiers stood 3 meters tall, covered in black armor that gleamed like beetle shells. They moved with the confidence of beings who had conquered 1,000 worlds. Their weapons could punch holes through concrete walls, and their armor could stop most human bullets. But Genesio was not worried. He had been preparing for this moment. For 6 months, everyone ready? He whispered into his radio. Around him, the 3rd Urban Defense Battalion waited in hidden positions throughout the ruined city. They were not regular soldiers. Most had been shopkeepers, office workers, and students just months ago. Now they were Earth's last line of defense. The alien soldiers began marching down the main street, their heavy boots crushing abandoned cars and debris. They expected to find a terrified population hiding in basements. Instead, they found something much more dangerous. "Contact, northwest corner," shouted Private Hyojin Shin, a young woman who used to work at the local bank. Hegemony troops turned toward her voice, raising their massive weapons. At that moment, they walked directly into a trap that had taken weeks to prepare. Construction equipment that looked broken and abandoned suddenly roared to life. Bulldozers with armor welded to their sides charged from side streets. Cranes swung, heavy concrete blocks like giant hammers. Even garbage trucks had been turned into weapons, their hydraulic systems modified to crush anything they grabbed. But the real surprise came from below their feet. Yoon-Ah. Ka had been a kindergarten teacher. Before the invasion, she knew how to be patient, how to plan carefully, and how to keep children safe. Now she used those same skills to keep her city safe. For weeks she had been placing explosive charges in the subway tunnels beneath the main streets. When the alien soldiers gathered at the intersection, she pressed the button. The ground exploded upward like a volcano. An entire platoon of hegemony troops disappeared into the collapsing street, their screams echoing from the tunnels below. The ones who survived found themselves trapped in a crater surrounded by angry humans with improvised weapons. 6 blocks away, 16-year-old Wu Jinlim lay flat on his stomach on the roof of his family's apartment building. In his hands was a hunting rifle that his grandfather had used to hunt deer in the mountains. It was old and simple, but it worked perfectly. Next to him sat his grandmother, Malzun Lim, who had lived through wars that most people only read about in history books. Her old eyes were sharp as she watched the alien soldiers through binoculars. "Wind is coming from the east," she whispered to her grandson. "Target is moving left to right. Lead him by 2 meters." Wu Jin adjusted his aim and pulled the trigger. Far below, a hegemony commander stumbled and fell. The boy's bullet had found a gap in the alien's armor, right where the neck joint met the helmet. This same scene repeated across the entire planet. In New York, a group of teenagers used remote-controlled toy cars loaded with explosives to attack alien supply convoys. In London, elderly citizens who remembered old wars coordinated resistance cells with the efficiency of military commanders. In Tokyo, scientists had turned the city's water system into a weapon, flooding alien positions with boiling steam. The hegemony soldiers had expected to fight an army. Instead, they found themselves fighting an entire civilization that refused to surrender above the planet. Captain Byung-ho Yoon piloted his ship through the debris field that had once been Earth's orbital defenses. The Inchin's Defiance was barely holding together. Its hull was covered with patches. Its engines ran on spare parts, and half its weapon systems had been jury-rigged from civilian technology. But it was still fighting. Target acquired called out his weapons officer, a young woman who used to maintain elevators before the war. Hegemony supply ship, bearing 307. "Fire everything we have," Bang-ho ordered. The small human ship launched every missile in its arsenal at the sea. Massive alien vessel. The hegemony ship tried to turn away, but it was too slow and too confident. The missiles struck its engine section, and the giant ship began spinning helplessly through space. That made 17 enemy ships destroyed by the Inchin's Defiance. It's not bad for a vessel that was held together mostly by determination and welding. Taped in a secret bunker beneath the ruins of Seoul, Lieutenant Ayoung-song listened to intercepted alien communications. Her translation software had learned the hegemony language by analyzing their radio traffic. And what she heard made her smile. "Command, this is Ground Force 7, one panicked voice reported. We cannot locate the human military command. Every citizen appears to be a combatant. They show no fear of death. How do we fight an enemy that considers martyrdom an honor?" Another transmission was even more interesting. "These humans fight like demons. They turn their own infrastructure against us. Their children build bombs from household items. Their elderly plan ambushes with military precision. Request immediate reinforcements." The responses from Hegemony High Command revealed growing desperation. More ships were being sent to Earth, pulled from other conquered worlds across the galaxy. Overlord Krex was throwing everything he had at one small planet that refused to kneel. But Young noticed something else in the intercepted messages. Coded transmissions from other worlds hidden in the alien communication networks. The crystal beings of Vorthok Prime were starting to vibrate in frequencies that jammed hegemony sensors. Gas creatures in distant nebulae were forming storm patterns. That interfered with alien navigation. Word of humanity's resistance was spreading across the galaxy. Other enslaved species were beginning to remember what freedom felt like. Earth was not just fighting for its own survival anymore. It was fighting to remind the galaxy that some things were worth dying for. The morning sun struggled to shine through the smoke that hung over what used to be a soul. General Jinho Park stood on a pile of broken concrete that had once been the steps of the government building where he used to work as an ambassador. That felt like a lifetime ago. His uniform was torn and dirty. His face showed the exhaustion of 3 months spent fighting an impossible war. Around him, the city lay in ruins. Most of the tall buildings had been knocked down by alien weapons. The streets were filled with rubble and the burnt remains of vehicles. But humanity was still fighting. Sir called out communications officer Ji-Hoon Kong from his makeshift station built inside the shell of an old bus. "You need to see this." Ji-Hoon had been monitoring radio signals from across the galaxy, using equipment salvaged from crashed alien ships. Most of the time, he heard only hegemony military communications, reports about human resistance, requests for more troops. Complaints about stubborn humans who refused to surrender. Today was different. Jinho walked over to the communication station, his boots crunching on broken glass. On the screen, made from parts of 3 different alien devices, images flickered from distant worlds. "They're fighting back," Ji-Hoon said, his voice filled with amazement. "All of them. The whole galaxy is rising up." The first image showed Vorthok Prime, the crystal world that had surrendered so quickly in the Confederation chamber months ago. But now the crystal beings were singing in harmonies that shattered their prison walls. Hegemony administrative buildings crumbled as the crystal creatures vibrated at frequencies that turned solid stone into powder. The next image came from the ethereal nebula, where gaseous beings lived in the empty space between stars. The creatures had formed massive storm systems that swept through space like hurricanes, pulling hegemony space stations from their orbits and crushing them with winds that moved faster than sound. Even the synthesis beings, the logical machine, creatures who calculated everything in terms of mathematics, had started breaking down in ways that crippled hegemony computer systems across 12 star systems. Su Young Hun, Jinho's intelligence chief, stood beside him watching the impossible scenes unfold. She was a small woman who had been a university professor before the war. Now she coordinated spy networks and analyzed enemy communications. "They're fighting back," she whispered, tears running down her dirty face. "All of them. The whole galaxy is rising." Jinho felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. For 3 months, Earth had stood alone against the hegemony. Millions of humans had died. Great cities had been destroyed. The planet's surface was scarred with craters and burning forests, but their sacrifice had not been in vain. High above, Earth's wounded surface, Overlord Krex stood on the bridge of his flagship and prepared to end this embarrassing resistance once and for all. His fleet had been reduced from 1,000 ships to fewer than 600. His ground forces were bogged down fighting civilians who refused to follow the normal rules of warfare. It was time to finish this. All ships, he commanded, prepare for planetary bombardment. Turn this world into glass and ash. Make sure no other species ever thinks about resisting the hegemony again. The massive weapons on his ships began charging, building up enough energy to crack continents and boil oceans. In minutes, Earth would be nothing but a dead rock floating in space. Then, space itself seemed to ripple and tear. Ships appeared from hyperspace by the hundreds. They came from every direction, above, below, and from all sides. Each vessel bore the markings of species that had been enslaved by the hegemony for centuries. The reformed Galactic Confederation had arrived, but this time they came as warriors. Not cowards. Commander Minho Choi sat in the pilot's seat of Soul's Vengeance, humanity's last operational battleship. The ship was a mess. Its hull was covered with patches. Half its weapons did not work properly, and its engine made strange noises that worried everyone on board. But it was still flying, and that was all that mattered. Through his window, Minho could see the massive hegemony flagship preparing to destroy his homeworld. Behind him, his crew consisted of volunteers who had refused to evacuate to the underground bunkers. They were teachers, mechanics, doctors, and students who had chosen to make their final stand in space. All ships Minho broadcast on every frequency his radio could reach. "This is Soul's Vengeance. We are humanity, and we do not yield." His small ship accelerated directly toward the enemy flagship, followed by hundreds of alien vessels that had come to join humanity's fight. The Vorthok ships sang as they flew, their crystal hulls ringing like bells. The ethereal vessels looked like colorful clouds with engines. The synthesis ships moved in perfect mathematical formations. The battle that followed lit up the space around Earth like the biggest fireworks display in history. Ships from 100 different worlds, species that had never worked together before, united behind the simple human idea that some things are worth dying for. Overlord Krex's flagship tried to turn away from the combined assault, but it was too late. Weapons from dozens of different civilizations converged on the massive vessel, overwhelming its shields and armor. The explosion could be seen from Earth's surface, a brilliant flash that outshone the sun for several seconds. Down in the ruins of Seoul, Jinho watched the light fade and saw the most beautiful sight in human history. The hegemony fleet was scattering, running away from the combined forces of free peoples who had finally remembered how to fight. The stars were free again. Later, as Earth began to heal from its wounds, visitors came from across the galaxy. Did not come as conquerors or even as helpers. They came as students, wanting to learn from the species that had taught the universe a simple truth. Courage, like freedom, spreads from person to person, world to world, until it cannot be stopped.